Hey everyone, you ready to talk about decentralized democratization? Awesome. Well, I am Yadira Blocker. I am head of events at Near Foundation. We have AVB and we have Blaze. So,
Woo!
oh, Martin. Can, Martin?
Developers.
One second. Actually, while I'm running and grabbing something, do you guys want to introduce yourself?
Yes.
Sure, yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Blaze, been with the ecosystem since before mainnet, a validator. Helped organize the validators of mainnet with the Open Shard Alliance, co-founder of Cheddar, and also champion of the NDC, so governance for the near ecosystem.
Thank you, Blaze. My name is AVB. I've been in the near ecosystem since 2021. I've seen a long evolution of governance from the first guilds to the marketing DAO and everything in between. Recently got elected into the Transparency Commission for the NDC. And yeah, got a podcast.
Awesome. All right, so what does 2024 look like for decentralized democracy? Let's start with first defining what democracy is and why it matters.
Yeah, so democracy generally is really about representation of a collective of people, and so the NDC Near Digital Collective is about the representation of the near ecosystem. We have a lot of different audiences that are part of that, so we've got stakeholders that are the backers of our ecosystem, validators, developers, our users, content creators. So there's a lot of different factions within the ecosystem, and really governance is designed to be representative of those to ensure that the ecosystem grows and is sustained over time.
I think that at the core you have participation and decision making. Then you're going to start adding as many qualifiers. It could be direct democracy, delegated democracy, pretend democracy, but as a whole, you'd be looking at how people engage with each other to make decisions that concern them.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So both you, Blaze and ABB, you've been with the near ecosystem for as long as I can remember. I joined back in January 2021, and I just remember seeing you both contributing, being a part of it. The NDC has existed for just over a year now. It was one of NEARCON's biggest announcements last year. CoinDesk covered it. It really seemed like things were moving towards the right direction for what decentralization looks like for near protocol. Now, looking at the last year, there's been a lot of activity when we're talking the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. Now, what the NDC is trying to accomplish is super hard. So tell me, what are some of the biggest accomplishments in your viewpoints?
Yeah, so I think the big accomplishments that we did really over this last year was, number one, establish a governance framework. So we looked at a lot of governance across many ecosystems, and then from there decided what really would be representative of the near ecosystem. So we created 3 governing bodies, which now happy to announce that we have the first elected Congress members to that governance framework. So 29 elected members elected by the community now operating within that governance framework. So that was a big one. The second thing we did was, it's very difficult. Governance in general is difficult. We know that in real world governance, it's not quite what we want. So trying to design systems that are new and improve upon what we have is interesting. But in Web3, that we have a primary challenge, and that is like, who is the community? Who are the members that should have voting power? What we've traditionally seen is stake-weighted voting, where the founders, the backers, the VCs, the whales come in and they have most of the voting power and most voting mechanisms. Well, we decided to turn that upside down, because what we looked at was that most of our active contributors in the ecosystem didn't have necessarily a ton of near. So what we did instead was created proof of personhood, where you could really register to become a human of near, And then if you were human, then you could vote. The other thing that we did to make sure that the members that were going to be elected to Congress had some vested interest in the ecosystem is we created an OG SBT. So we created a soul-bound token standard for the ecosystem. So soul-bound tokens are something that tie to a soul, and we knew that was really important. So proof of personhood with SBTs allowed you to become an OG, allowed you to declare your nomination, and then to be elected by the community. The third thing that we did was then we took this proof of personhood and we had a one person, one vote election process. So that's what elected the current Congress, and we had about 892 or so folks show up to vote. So that was quite interesting. So it is definitely a social experiment that we really haven't seen in Web3 yet. So we've got a new experiment underway here.
So actually, let's talk a bit about the election. Sorry, Alejandro. But tell me more about like the various houses. How often are you planning these elections? This was obviously the first. What's kind of taking off from here, from those learnings?
Yeah, AVB, you're aware. You want to chime in here?
Depending on who you ask, you'll get a different answer. So you got to pick the speaker. Just in the biggest accomplishment, and this ties with your question, I think that getting to the destination, like being alive, would be the biggest accomplishment. It's almost like you're driving a car, you crash, and then you keep going.
Yeah.
There are many lessons along the way, and I think it's important to put in context that as we describe things as they are now, they're probably going to be evolving very soon, and there's been many lessons learned already. Question, the three houses?
Mm-hmm.
So there are three houses. There's a House of Merit, 15 people, Council of Advisors, 7 people, and Transparency Commission, 7 people. The initial idea was that the House of Merit people would be elected due to their experience and the value that they could contribute. They'd be placed in a position to be able to allocate the budget responsibly. There would be oversight from the Council of Advisors, even more senior people, veto power. They can provide advice, as the name implies, but also make sure that the House of Merit is kept in reign. And then the Transparency Commission, it's meant to be an independent body to provide ecosystem-wide oversight. And that's the theory. There's been, everybody wants to jump in.
Yeah, so I mean, I think he hit it, but Council of Advisors is more of your board, so they have that strategic direction, making sure that the budget allocation is really aligned with where we're going as an ecosystem, making sure that those funds are deployed correctly, also helping the House of Merit with vision, policy, and things of that nature as well. And then we say the Transparency Commission, which AVB is a member of, are the watchdogs of the Treasury and of the governance framework, ensuring that if we do have bad actors enter the scene, that we have processes and procedures to remove those folks from governance after there's been an investigation. And then, of course, HOM is about deploying the budget and also setting a lot of the policies on how governance works for the ecosystem.
So I was on maternity leave when the elections were taking place, and
Lucky you.
I know, and I was very present with my son, but every now and then I would pop on Twitter and I would take a look at what was going on. And transparency was something that I saw in some threads. You're obviously deeply involved, AVB. Where do you think we need to shine more transparency on?
Decentralized governance, it's almost like an oxymoron? No. They are fundamentally incompatible. We're creating smart contracts so that we remove human trust. We're removing middlemen. We don't have to rely on some mediocre person to perform something. Like, we're putting the trust in the system. The challenge is, how do we govern this immutable, efficient code that is better than what came before it, if we also put humans in the middle? So decentralized governance need to be seen in that spectrum or trying to progress. We spent a lot of time, I say we loosely, Blaze with GWG and me with Transparency Commission now, we're spending a lot of time putting in place frameworks that if the person in charge of acting on it do their job, they're great. If they choose to disappear for 3 months, nothing happens. So the challenges that we have now are trying to reconcile the autonomous part in a DAO with the responsibility of stepping up to public office, with the reality that everyone may not be as skilled or as experienced or just as committed to getting the job done. So yeah, I think that as we move forward from that base and acknowledging that the written word is correct, we need to move into that human side of things, or skip that altogether and just go to the AI and.
Well, so speaking of AI, yesterday Ilya talked a lot about AI governance. What are some of the behind the scenes ideas, game plans, tell me, that you're aware of, what's coming to the table? What do we expect more from AI governance in 2024?
There's going to be a pitch at 2:30. One thing that is really unique about the NEAR ecosystem is the remarkable speed that we go from idea, vision, and execution. Often we execute first and then we find out later. So people are going to be very surprised very soon that this seemingly new vision that Ilya has presented yesterday around AI governance is actually already fairly advanced, and there are experiments that will be revealed to you in about an hour. And I think that the right way to see it is, we'll be a long way till we get to AI president. At the moment, it's really more of like a unified layer of compliance and due diligence. Instead of putting a proposal here and getting an outcome there and a black box in the middle where the reality is people don't read the proposals, they do not do due diligence, etc., you're going to have much faster turnaround times. You're going to have a system that is able to process unlimited information as much as you throw it. They can go through GitHub repos better than most technical grant proposers. So there's going to be a layer of efficiency to enable us to better guide the ecosystem. And yeah, I think that would be at the grant allocation level. That would basically acknowledge that the roadblock that we have now is we're desperate for funding and the community is kind of suffering, but we're also not trusting each other, so we've hit the handbrake. And yeah, AI are friends, not foes, and I would welcome that era.
Yeah, and I can certainly see how AI is going to play a role in, taking the emotion out of the equation. So one of the things that we know is that in governance, even with these 29 elected individuals, we have many different cultures, many different languages, different understanding of what, folks think governance is, right? So AI is going to allow us to use that as a tool to take the emotion out of the decision making longer term and to make decisions that are based on actually factual data. So part of the challenge that we've experienced with electing all these OGs is that we have a lot of folks that are active contributors to the NEAR ecosystem, and they may not always have the time available to contribute fully, or maybe they're not engaged or not quite understanding governance in general. So I think AI will help us bridge that gap as well to bring more cohesive understanding to the collective of what governance is, how we're progressing, where we're going, and use that as a real tool and asset.
Maybe you mentioned earlier while we were chatting that democracy is often tied to the tools and technology we have. Now, if we look at next year and even the years beyond that, what are some governance experiments besides AI, besides what we're playing with today, that you think need to emerge? What will emerge? What are you dreaming of for the future with governance?
Excellent question. So the framework for governance is, as you mentioned, limited to technology. So we think of elections every 5 years. We could have them more often. We could have them on specific issues, like we just had a referendum in Australia. It's just that it is so expensive and it is so much work that due to the constraints, the operational constraints, we just don't do it very often. There should be a correlation between a system that is efficient, cheap, and even more trustworthy to enable you to do more decisions. And this is where the scope of governance is going to start to evolve, because even if we look at something like inflation data, it's been spoken about recently in popular podcasts that the tools that we have for gathering the data are inefficient. and the information is often lagging up to 6 months. They're very blunt tools for making very big decisions. So the vision for the open web basically acknowledges that if we have the right data, we can make really much better decisions, and we're going to enter a world where we're going to start seeing data commons and public goods, and this is where the governance comes in. How do we manage these new structures that are in many ways autonomous? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think, mentioned.
I see Olga frowning. So if we look at the power of LLMs to date, they're amazing, but they've been trained on mostly private data. So as we realize how valuable that information is, then the question is, who is going to own all the data from now into the future that will power systems that are going to create 100 times more value? Like, everything is going to be interconnected. AIs are going to be engaging with each other through AI. If we have machines engaging with each other through AI and creating a lot of value, who owns that network? Who owns that data? It's basically governance all the way up the stack. And yeah, you should do it on the NEAR protocol.
Blaze, do you have any comments to add to that?
Yeah, so what's the future look like for governance? We know that AI plays a big role in it, but I think we're going to continue to experiment with decentralization as part of the process as well. So it's really about how you take a network and distribute the power to the greatest ends, right? Because the power of a network is in its band. So we really need to continue to distribute power, give more autonomy where autonomy is deserved, right? Make sure that autonomy is something that we can have within decentralization. We know that folks are very tribal in nature, so figuring out how governance supports that, right, and supports collectives, not just one collective, but many collectives, to self-organize, to build their own autonomy, and then request funding so that the ecosystem continues to grow. So I think we'll see much more experiments in governance where we've seen more centralized governance. We'll see if we can find a way through AI really to begin to really understand and see true decentralized governance at work,
Yeah, and NEAR is an ecosystem that really believes in an open web. Obviously, NEARCON's theme this year is Step into the Open Web. So I might be biased. I think we're doing it the best. I think we're actually getting to true decentralization of the protocol. But if we look at other ecosystems, who else is doing it? Who's doing it well? What are they doing?
Yeah, one of the models that a lot of folks are looking at, that has been quite successful is Gitcoin and the model that they've done in terms of distributing grants. And we looked at that one quite a bit and tried to look at what the shortfalls were there and then expand upon those as well. And we actually have some of those folks that were consultants for us as well that came in and helped look at our governance models to do it. But I think it's about, we know that there is going to need to be humanity at the heart of governance. We need to know that we're actually giving either autonomous agents or humans funding. So I think that, this proof of humanity with reputation, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and ecosystems that are focusing on, their humans and building reputation for them will be a critical part to governance and growth.
Yeah, when I think of Gitcoin and I think of Kevin Owaki, I often think of public goods and just really having access. And that's something I think they do such a good job at pushing and promoting, which I see as a big driver for decentralization. AVB.
Well, the reassuring thing is that it's a disaster everywhere. It's a classic, tragic moment when you're so good at your job, you get promoted to become a manager, and then you stop doing what you're good at. So governance is split either in engineers who are not really the best at governance, or people that see the money that the engineers are creating, the value, and are trying to prioritize for short-term profit. It's very hard to get human alignment. Every time that you try to get aligned, then they say it's not decentralized anymore. So it's almost like your values are being used against you to extract as much value as possible. We need to find a way to, bring the AI.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 1 year is really just a short amount of time. I look at the entire world right now has systemic issues. And when you're taking democracy and you're trying to transform it and redefine it, you're really going uphill against hundreds of years of these systemic issues that have been in place that don't work for society right now. How long do you think it's going to take until we really feel improvement? And what we're doing even transfers to the rest of the world, whether it's like an election fraud, preventing that, giving more public goods access to the people.
It's probably two tiers there. The first thing is that in the real world, it's very hard because if you don't like the government and there can only be one, you have to leave. In the Web3 world, it's fascinating because if you don't like the NDC and you don't like Gilead, you can just fork it. And there's some factions out there thinking of just splitting ways if things get back. So the fact that we can create new competing groups and always strive for excellence and have many experiments and just battle it out until something works should give everyone hope. If the ultimate goal is to have the open web stack. Those are the protocol layer.
Which one?
I forgot the second part.
Oh,
But never number things.
So really, my point was, the systems we have today have been in place for hundreds of years, in my opinion. I don't think there's been much change. Someone can definitely debate that point with me. But with what we're trying to do with the NDC, I mean, how soon do you think we'll start to really see impact, not just like within the near ecosystem, but even start to translate into other parts of the world or other ecosystems?
Yeah, I think that, the data is what AVB was trying to allude to, is that we need systems to support the path to decentralization. We need systems that can really look at the data, look at what the impact was. That's where AI really enters the scene. So we know that, it's going to take probably at least, 3 to 5 years on any strategy to see something really fully developed. The thing that we've always said about NDC is that it's evolving governance. And really what that means is that we want to evolve the governance as we learn more, as we experiment more, as a community gives more feedback, as we have more tooling like AI coming in to give additional feedback as well. We want to make sure that governance really evolves to do two things: sustain the near ecosystem and grow the near ecosystem. And that means really, supporting all of the representatives or all the collectives within it. So it's going to be a narrative that just grows over time. What we can see happening, though, is that we will have, like AVB said, we'll probably have forks of NDC, right? Is NDC going to be the only, governance system? Is it going to be the only treasury? That remains to be seen. Some folks have more of a vision of a centralized model of governance. Some want to test decentralization. So I think we'll see the nodes in the near ecosystem continue to expand as we go cross-chain. There will be several governance models, several governance frameworks. Many of those will be iterations of NDC. Maybe they'll say, NDC v1, we want to take that, and we want that to be our governance system. And then we'll have this continual evolution of governance. And some may decide to stay on the old version, some may decide to go to the new version, but that really is the power of building the network and allowing nodes to have their own autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any comments to add, AVB?
Yeah, I think that we need to be careful not to do governance for governance sake. If we're going to have a positive impact in the world, it's going to be the near tech stack. So we need to see the governance as like the minimum thing that we can do to have the highest impact. Community treasury should be seen as a pile of gold. It's a privilege to access it. We invite the best and brightest. Pitch us your idea, and if it's good, we give you money. If not, that's the end of the story. And it should be all those, top tier contributors that we aggregate that start delivering. It's very hard to assess how much progress we've had in the near ecosystem in general and in governance because there's been many primitives falling in place. And I think that if you were to aggregate the presentations from NEARCON, most people would probably come to the conclusion that they can build something now that they could not have possibly built 1 year ago. So it's almost like we have to reset the timer and say, okay, with this onboarding, with data availability, with multi-chain abstraction, like we have to start from we need to reset our expectations, including what we fund and how we fund it. I'm personally of the view that nothing should get funded unless that tech stack gets implemented, unless you're maximizing the advantage that NEAR provides to you. We're wasting money.
Yeah. No, a bit of maybe a lighter question, but also a big passion area for myself. I really look at diversity. I look at culture, and I look at diversity of all layers: diversity of thought, diversity of background, geography. I'm a full believer that the more diversity you have in whatever you're doing, the more informed and more intentional and just more refined your project or outcome will even become. What are you going to do in 2024 to kind of help bring in more diversity within the NDC?
Yeah, it's interesting. The governing bodies are quite diverse today, but when you look at diversity, you also have to assess, when we're talking about specifically governance, what are the skill sets of these individuals, right? So what we did is we started with just the OGSBT. So if you've been in the NEAR ecosystem, you could run, you could be elected, right? Most folks had a minimum of 100 votes to be able to get elected. But as we've kind of done this experiment, we've also realized that there are many cultural differences within the NDC, and the way that one culture may interact is significantly different than others. So we do have to breed a culture of collaboration and innovation. That's at the heart of it. So I think that focusing on ways to build environments that are collaborative and innovative, where people really are there for one purpose, to work together, one another, and we're starting to see that amongst the houses now, where there was some specific, critiques or things like that. More folks are saying, hey, now it's time to work together. So I think we've got to continue to breed that culture, and culture is part of the Transparency Commission's commission, is to ensure that we have good culture within the ecosystem, within the NDC itself. So I think that'll be a major topic for these next governance sessions.
Yeah, I think the diversity question is hard because sometimes people focus too much on the individual. The best performing teams and most diverse that I've been in, no one feels like they're filling a diversity quota, and everyone feels like an equal. There's a shared mission, and there's an access to opportunity that people just take it. So I think that we should be thinking about it more like ecosystem-wide. Which regions do we want to have a presence in, and the opportunities clear to them? Can we find leaders in those regions to activate groups? We've noticed the amount of babies, and we've discussed seriously, hey, we should have childcare next year. Our third panelist had to fly early home because of family issues. So I think that we can be very pragmatic, but always acknowledging that, we've got the mission and, need to find the people where they are, but
yeah, I'm a big believer in skill set, right? The more diverse the skill sets you have, the more complementary your teams are. Maintaining that agility, especially because we work in such a fast-paced, innovative space. Being nimble, being able to fast act, I think it has to be in the NDC too.
Just to follow up on that, and I know that Ilya covered it quite a bit in the presentation the other day, but gatekeeping, right? So one of the things that we really got to look at in NDC is how many rules are we going to establish? For instance, when you said diversity, we certainly need more women in governance, right? And we certainly need all kinds of culture and diversity. But the moment you begin to start to make these rules around these things and force those agendas, then we start gatekeeping the process. So I think it's really going to be through community discourse that we find out what is the right balance, on these different topics. And that goes from everything to what skill set should you have to actually be elected, right? Do you need to have do you need to understand finance, budgets, KPIs, OKRs? Do you need that level, or can you just be a community member? So I think through discourse, we'll need to continue to find what the balance is there, but also be real clear about not making too many rules too fast, because that will really create a system of centralization faster than we would anticipate.
Well, and I think those are some of the systems that we're trying to combat as we even get into next year. Now, I can talk about that for hours. while we are at time, I do want to leave it here for any closing comments, anything you want to let the audience know. If we could get the NDC QR code up on the screens, that would be great. So yeah, leave it with you guys. Any last closing comments?
Yeah, we've entered a new era. For a while, there was a lot of grievances and complaints, and we finally have the chance to shape things in the way that you want. If you see something and it's kind of crap, you can just start a competing alternative. Ooh, second time, sorry. And yeah, if you want to get involved, now would be a good time. This is now ours to make it succeed or fail, so if you're interested, just reach out.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. If you're not happy with NDC or you feel you have something to contribute, this is your moment. You can join the movement. It's still very open. All you have to be right now is a human on NEAR to be able to vote and make your voice heard. So please check out the QR code if it's up there. Join the NDC. It's a community-led initiative to build governance and funding, decentralized funding on the NEAR ecosystem. So we really appreciate your contribution, and thank you.
Yeah, AVB, Blaze. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you want to get involved, also now would be the time because the AI is coming. I'll see you at 2:30.
Well, thank you, AVB, Blaze. This was amazing. Let's continue to keep in touch and chat about next year.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.